Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to thank Groton Public Library for having this event, and I'm excited about this incredible panel that we have tonight. But before we begin the discussion, I have two individuals who would like to share the importance of this incredible book called Hey Kiddo by Jarrett Krosoczka. And this incredible book sheds light on being a loss of when it comes to addiction, abuse, and even our own internal battles that we deal with when it comes to some of the people that are very close to us. And I'm going to bring up Patrick Sheehan from Safe Futures, who does incredible work in New London County, and if you could say a few words about why this book is so important, and also about some of the work that he also does within the community. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I also want to thank the Groton Library for having us, and thank Kevin for inviting me to speak for a minute. I'm here because I've worked at Safe Futures for the last 5 years with families who've experienced abuse, sexual violence, domestic violence. I read this book because my wife Frieda is on the panel, and I wanted to share that experience with her. And it struck me that I don't know Jarrett, but I've known the same kids that he was, right? I've worked with so many of those kids who go home and they don't know what they're walking into. They don't know what kind of emotional storm they're going to walk into. They're not going to know what they're going to be blamed for today. They're not going to know if they're going to get a 5-course meal or told to shut up and go to your room. I work at Safe Futures within our prevention department. So I go into middle schools and high schools, and I try to teach kids about healthy relationships. And one of the ways that we like to begin the program is by really talking to the students and saying that everybody has their own normal. Right? Everybody has their own normal. I can't tell you what a normal relationship is, because if I got 30 kids in the room, there's 30 different normals. And I ask them to take into that perspective of what they've learned. You know what your normal is, because it's what you saw with your maybe parents or grandparents or foster parents or your siblings or your cousins or your neighbors. Whatever relationships you saw around you, that's what you expect. Normal fighting can include yelling and hitting and screaming. It can include a grandma who puts you down all the time. And the way that kids absorb that is by finding ways to survive. I felt like the story was a great kind of love story to art as a survival mechanism. I thought it was a great love story to some of the people in his lives, but it was also a document for how we look back at our trauma. And so, at Safe Futures, our goal is to try to help everybody who's being traumatized in their relationships and to try to prevent them more trauma in relationships, to try to prevent the next generation from experiencing it again. You can't change something if you don't acknowledge it's a problem. And Hey Kiddo did a great job acknowledging the problem. And I'm excited and hope that tonight's panel continues that kind of acknowledgement of different people's realities and by bringing some more stories into the room.
And then Sammy Colonna is getting ready to come up here to bless us with a poem about his mother and some of the trauma he faced when he lost his mom. So let's give Sammy Colonna a round of applause. Thank you so much, Sammy.
Thank you. Thank you. My mother had passed away when I was 17, and that really hit me hard. My father wasn't around at all. He tried to when I was younger, but because he was a violent man, he ended up making negative decisions. But I can sense when I was a child that my mother had a hard time she had to continue fighting her addiction of using drugs and to raise a child by herself. So this poem is dedicated to her and how much she meant to me. And also it really expresses how I felt at that time. It's not necessarily how I feel now, but you can imagine as a 17-year-old child, probably lash out a lot of anger. This poem is called The Man That Lives Up Above. I ask why, until my tears come out to cry. 'Cause sometimes I feel like Biggie and I'm just ready to die. See, they took away that one thing that was always there with me, that was always holding me when I needed her. Thank you. So that poem is something really, really dear to me, and I'm hoping that that our discussion today can be able to help others realize that, you know, no matter what that person has gone through, they're still a human being that is constantly, you know, struggling with all their past trauma, but trying to be the better human being. And that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to be better human beings as every day goes by, so we all have a collective effort. And that's why we should continue supporting each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sammy. Appreciate you.
Yep.
So, when I thought of this panel and I thought of this discussion, I kept thinking in my head, what can I title this? You know, and I said, society has all these preconceived notions about people who deal with trauma and abuse. And, you know, I just started thinking about my own life as well. And I was like, and I started thinking about who could I have on the panel? And who could understand, you know, because society says the fruit doesn't fall too far from the tree. So they always say if you grew up in an abusive home, that means you're going to end up being abusive. If your mom or dad or a family member is incarcerated, then 9 times out of 10, statistically, you are going to be incarcerated. If you see alcoholism in your household, 9 times out of 10, you're going to end up abusing alcohol as you get older. So before we get into this discussion, I would like for my extraordinary panel here to introduce yourself, who you are, why are you here today, and what would you like the viewers and listeners to get from this incredible, insightful panel discussion tonight?
Hi, my name is Frieda Berrigan. I live in New London. I work for Fresh New London. We work with young people growing vegetables and also growing leadership in New London and transforming physical spaces from empty lots or sort of derelict areas into beautiful and productive public goods and common spaces. So that's the work that I do for, well, because it makes me really happy and because that's how I earn my living. And then in my spare time, I also am part of an effort in New London around affordable housing, and we formed a community land trust, and we're purchasing buildings, and actually it's kind of sort of the same thing that I'm doing for my work, but not getting paid for it, and organizing around permanently affordable housing in New London, and also preparing people for home ownership. And I can talk more about that later. So that really has, I guess, sort of nothing to do with Hey Kiddo necessarily. My mom is 79 years old, is currently in prison, currently awaiting, or in jail, awaiting trial. And I have spent a lot of my life sort of separated from my parents by jail and prison. Not for kind of the reasons in the book. My parents are peace activists and radicals, but some of the strands that Jarrett talks about abandonment and anger, and feeling alienated from peers because of what's going on in the home is certainly stuff I resonated with and can speak more about.
Yes, my name is Sammy Colonna. I am a clinical case manager at Gilead Community Services, and my role there is working with clients who are struggling with not only mental health disorders, different traumas, sometimes even a substance abuse history. And so I've worked with adolescent, and I've worked with adults, all different ages and different backgrounds. And so I've seen a good collection of different difficult situations our clients can deal with at times. And Hey Kiddo resembles a lot of those situations, especially with adolescents. You have situations where one parent is involved and the other is not, or maybe two of them are involved. One is incarcerated, the other one is dealing with substance abuse and trying to meet up with social workers and trying to prove themselves, oh, I can be a good parent. And it's very traumatic for adolescents, especially boys specifically. Boys, what I've noticed is that it's hard for them to open up, and opening up to another man, a boy opening up to another man is probably really challenging. It's better dynamic when it's a boy and an older woman, because a lot of times they can kind of assimilate and really relate to an older, positive female role model. But it kind of shows the dynamic of what direction America has gone into, where we have a lot more, more positive female role models, but then our the fathers are out of the picture, and that's what's happening here in Hey Kiddo. And there's much more happening in the book, and that's what makes a lot of their past and their traumas really complicated. And when you mix all of that in there, and bad role models, people in the community, that's why it's so important for other people in the community, male role models and even female role models, to be able to step in there and be able to connect to those, whether it's adolescents or other adults. If they don't connect with role models in the community, then it'll be hard for them to really feel comfortable with going to specific individuals and really letting them know, hey, I need help. And that's one of those questions is, I need help. And a lot of times people feel really vulnerable and scared to even ask for that.
Thank you.
So I just continue to do the work that I can, and I appreciate everyone else that puts in the effort as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Giordano. I am 25 years old, and I am in recovery from drugs and alcohol for about 3.5 years now. I work full-time for my father's business. I just re-enrolled in college recently. I'm not sure what I'm going to major in, but I know it's going to be along the lines of helping people. I'm here because this book is literally my story, aside from the father being absent. And what I would like people to take away from this today is, in my opinion, your family does not define you. That is your mission, to define yourself in your own life. So that's it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tirico Satterfield. I'm the CEO of Real Life Empire, which is a youth development company over in Norwich, Connecticut. And I am here today to talk about Hey Kiddo. I was just sharing with Ashley that the big thing for me with this, just the title alone, resonates so much because of I grew up in a very abusive household with a father who abused my mother, but also abused me. And the one person that kind of came in and stood up to my bully, my father, was an aunt. And that aunt, she calls me, Hey Kiddo. That's what she actually calls me. And so just hearing the title, also resonates so much. I can't wait to really get down into the meat of the discussion about the book. I want to say thank you to Groton Public Library for hosting us here today and actually bringing us all together to talk about such a great topic that I think families and people in the community, Kevin, really need to hear more about, because it's a lot of things I think that would resonate with listeners and people in their homes and in their families as well. So I'm excited, and I hope that people take away from this, very similar to what Ashley shared just now, that you're not defined by your past. I was able to write a new book. And so I'm continuing to write that book, and they're able to write that story each and every day that they live their lives, because there is a treasure buried beneath the dirt of your life.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The other day, I walked up the street from my house where I live at Toby May, and I was sitting in the park, and my nephew was running around, and this man, he approached me and he said, "Sir, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Yeah," and he said to me, "Can I share a little quick story with you?" And I said, "Of course." And he said that when he was 12 years old, he said he used to be afraid to go home when he would get off the school bus. And when he would get off the school bus, he would wait in the parking lot and sometimes in the driveway of his house. And because he was afraid to go in the house, because he didn't know what was going on in the house when he got out of school. Because there were a couple people in the house that were on drugs and also had an alcohol problem as well. And he said, even as he said that last, and then he said he got to know the police so well to the point where he was in middle school and high school where he knew them by name because they would come to his house all the time. And then he said as he got older, he became a professional. And he said one of his parents was still dealing with drug issues. And he would have to go on the corner and talk to them and see if they can get help. And he remembered one day going to the hospital, and he said his father said to him, "Hey, I got to go get high before I put myself in treatment." And at that time, he was a teacher as well. And he's going to the hospital because he has to go teach in the morning, and he's going to the hospital, and he said, "I got to go take another hit of some dope before they put me into treatment because I don't have insurance." And all those years of his life, 20 plus years watching family members deal with drugs on and off all his life. That young man was me. I'm that person. My father has only been clean now since 2009 when he came out of prison. That was me. I was that 12-year-old who used to sit in that driveway of my house and actually sit there with my brother, who's 3 years younger than I am, and go, "Okay, we can't go in the house right now. We don't know what's going on in the house." My mother was the only clean person in the house. And my father was on and off drugs throughout my entire life until 2009, even as a professional. So when I think of Hey Kiddo, I connect it very close to Jarrett Krosoczka and his mission and really what he was trying to get across in this book. So I am very honored to have all of you here today because time is something you can never get back. And I appreciate you taking the time to be here to discuss this important topic. But when I think about this incredible book, Hey Kiddo, first thing that comes to my mind is, why do you think Jarrett Krosoczka titled the book Hey Kiddo? Ashley.
Oh, wow. Why do I think he titled it that?
Yeah.
For me, in my experience, it's the one thing, right? So my mom, when she would write me letters in prison, they would always say, "Hey, princess." And now when she calls me from prison, she says, "Hey, kiddo." And to me, that is the only consistent thing that I get from my mother. So when I hear that, it brings me right back to my mom. Hey, kiddo. And I think that might be part of why he chose it, because it's the only consistent thing that she had. I mean, if you read the whole book, it's the only thing that she consistently did for him was say, hey, kiddo. Everything else was kind of a letdown. So that's my opinion on why he would call it that.
Frieda, what do you think? I mean, your spin on it when you think of
Yeah.
like Jarrett.
Yeah. I really liked what Ashley said, and I'm trying to think if I can bring anything different to it. It makes me think about his relationship with his grandfather, and one of the things I really appreciated about the book was that everyone in the book is flawed, right? Even the grandpa, comes home late, drinks too much, antagonizes the grandma. Everybody's flawed, but nobody's to blame, right? He's mad at his mother. He harbors a ton of anger. He expresses his anger so beautifully, so constructively, it seems to me. But his grandpa teaching him how to drive in the cemetery, the way the book opens, and his grandpa just kind of continuing to love his mother, even, through all of her failings and disappointments and her breaking down over and over again. The grandpa continues to love the mom, and I think teaches Jarrett a lot about how to love, but like in a clear-eyed kind of, I can't depend on you, but I still love you kind of way. And I think that kind of carries Jarrett through, along with like his ability to articulate his anger and hold people responsible without that kind of digging back into himself somehow.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And when you mentioned Frieda, you mentioned like how Jarrett expressed in the book, how he continued to love his mother through all her failures.
Right.
And the first person I think of on this panel is I think about you, Tirico. With all the stuff that you dealt with your mom.
Yeah.
And all those years. How did you continually love your mom through all those different traumas and different issues that you had to deal with? And how did you make that connection to Jarrett in the book?
So definitely, when you talk about dealing with hurt and trauma, because that's exactly what my situation was. Definitely watching my mother, first of all, her resilience. Watching her get up, because there were some days my mom was beaten to the floor. And so to watch my mom get back up, watch her climb up a wall to stand back up again, when my father would knock her down. I remember those images. I remember her coming out her room to go get ice or something, kind of to restore herself, if you would. But I remember watching her walk and continue to press forward. I remember her words to me in those moments of her saying, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. How that translate over into my life. A lot of people say, well, that's some major trauma that you saw. Little did I know that trauma that I saw my mom go through helped prepare me for moments in my life when I would experience what felt like trauma to me. Being in college and wanting to quit. And you think about your mom went through some really difficult stuff and she got up. Your mom was beaten and she got up. And I watched her restore her faith in life. I've watched her restore her faith in love. I watched her restore her faith, and I had the most beautiful picture of forgiveness. Of forgiveness and her being willing to believe and hope again and trust again. And that kind of, when I hear that, the title, Hey Kiddo to me is a rescue. It's almost like a rescue term of safety. Hey kiddo, it's gonna be okay. Hey kiddo, one it's gonna be better one day, because that's what I lived with. And so to have that, Kevin, that hurt, to live in my home so consistently, because I watched it for 18 years, and to watch my mom remarry again, things like that, to believe and see a man actually come in and treat her and care for her and receive healthy love. She really showed me and taught me that forgiveness is very powerful and love is powerful. So that's how it resonates with me from the book and thinking about the family members. I had a grandparent, very similar to the grandparents here in the book. My grandfather, he was an alcoholic up until the age of 55. Then got in church and kind of shifted his life and his culture around. But I watched him struggle, have those struggles, and watch him bounce back and forth in and out of the house. So it also told me, wow, not only did my mom go through these elements of trauma with my father, this started for my mother when she was even a young kid, that those elements were there then. So it made the story, and when I say resilient, it took it to a whole nother level for me and a whole new understanding. Like she really had to live through this her entire life. And so it kind of fed me strength though. And I still tell my mom today that she is the picture of strength that I needed for my journey in life. And I thank her every day that I was able to be there to witness not just the frailty, but also the eternal commitment to love and forgiveness. It was such a blessing.
And I love what you just said, you know, when you think about forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
You're learning about forgiveness. And I think it's so many people who hold bitterness and anger, right? Because the reality is you're hurt by maybe a parent or a family member being incarcerated, right? Because the lack of them not being there, right? The bitterness. You're hurt by that person using drugs, right? You're hurt by that person who may have abused you. But when I think about that, I think about what are some of the lessons that we learn from the personal family member who have hurt us the most, you know? And what comes to Sammy, you know, because you mentioned earlier, you mentioned that, you know, your father was a very violent man, right? And you watch your mom go through a lot of issues in her personal life. You know, by the time you were 17, you know, you experienced that your mother's death and everything as well, right? So what have you learned from all that hurt and that pain, right? That the person that was the closest to you, what did you learn from her or from your mom or even from your dad? What was the lesson that you learned from that experience?
Well, she went through a lot, and she was really honest with me at a young age about. She told me when I was about 6 or 7 of when she was struggling with drugs, she lost custody of me, and I was about 2 or 3, and she had to go to court. She had to take classes, drug rehab classes. I remember that she won a lot of certificates, and I still have those certificates kind of framed up.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And she was really resilient with it. I can just tell, because she would talk about those stories as if they just happened like not too long ago. And it took her 3 years. So it took her an additional 3 years, and during that time, I think I was bouncing with other families, and then I was living with relatives. And I always sensed that there was friction, whether it was me going with another family or even with my relatives. And throughout that time, you know, she still stood level-headed enough to be able to do what the court had asked her to do and take all those classes and get me back. So it, like her receiving all that opposition and that mental stress, she was still able to just be so resilient through it all. And so when I think of any challenge that I have, I do think, as Tirico was mentioning earlier, about like what our mothers had went through. And they went through some really scary things. And so it teaches me about, like, no matter what happens, that it's not the end of it. What I went through and what she went through was terrible. She went through a huge amount of drug abuse and just dealing with the motions and the oceans of all those difficult situations and getting me back. At a young age, I dealt with my mother passing away when I was still fairly young. So those situations, I still remind myself that just because it's getting tough, whatever the situation or whether it be violent or something that is within the family, I know it's something that I can persevere through because my mother did the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Sammy.
Yeah.
And we talk about, you said perseverance, right?
Yeah.
And something that you learned from that experience. And then what comes to my mind right now, I think of Ashley and Frieda. Because the two of you on this panel right now, you have a parent that's incarcerated. And, you know, looking at it and thinking about, hey, kiddo, and, you know, talking to your parent over the phone and not having that emotional connection now. Or maybe not emotional, but physical. You know, how has that affected you emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, you know, on many levels? And, you know, how do you endure that on a daily basis? Because that's both of you, it's your mothers. You know, it's someone very close to you. So, Frieda, please.
Sure. Hopefully this isn't too long of a story, but my sister is 7 years younger than I am, and we have a brother who's just a year younger than I am. And she called me up a while ago. She was doing social work, and she had found this book. It was a book on trauma stewardship. And she was reading it. She was finding it really helpful about how people go into social work, and they go in with their whole selves, and they go in with their trauma, and then they work through their own trauma within helping other people, and how that is, you know, maybe not the best thing, and that people need to kind of deal. The book is sort of trying to help you identify and process your own trauma, and then, you know, be available to other people, and makes for sort of healthier workspaces and, you know, boundaries and limits within the social work field. So she's telling me all of this, and I said, "Oh my God, Kate, well, like, did something terrible happen to you? Like, what, did I miss something? Are you okay? Like, what trauma? What is this trauma of which you speak, Kate?"
Right.
And I was like, did I miss a mugging or some sort of awful thing in my sister's life? Like, am I the worst big sister in the world? She was like, "You idiot. Like, our parents have been in jail like our entire lives." And I was like, oh, right. Oh my gosh. So, is that right? That's okay. All right, sure. That's totally traumatic. And the fact that there's a political overlay to it, or that we're prepared, or that we're part of this political project, doesn't, it provides a rationale for the trauma, but it doesn't alleviate the trauma, right? And it was this deep moment where I was like, oh, I am traumatized by my parents' absence and throughout my life, and the fact that we wrote letters and that we sort of tried to transcend prison in all of these ways doesn't make the fact that my mother, you know, missed these big parts of my life. It doesn't obviate that pain, and so, you know, my mother's 79 years old. She's a grandmother of 6. We have 3 children. My brother has 3 children. She believes very deeply. Her conscience has told her that, you know, the best way to oppose nuclear weapons is to engage in this activity that, you know, the government thinks is illegal. And there she is in a county jail in Georgia. And I'm 45 years old. I'm supposed to be kind of. Do we need our mothers at 45? Yes, we absolutely
We always
do.
need our mothers.
And our children need their grandmothers. And so I find myself sort of doing all of this bridging and kind of all that elder care that one does as one's parents get older, but doing that like mediated by this perverse, awful system. I hope this isn't too personal, but my mom made this book for me, and these are letters that she wrote to my brother and I in 1977. So we were little, and she wrote these beautiful cards.
That is beautiful.
For us, and she's a really talented artist, and so in Hey Kiddo, when the mom is writing all of these letters, I was like, oh my gosh, my mom wrote these letters too. And anyway, so she put all of this together for us, and
Oh man.
but now, right, prison has changed, right? And prison is prison has always been awful, but now it's a money-making enterprise, and in a way that it wasn't.
Can you say that again, Frieda, please?
Now prison, jail, the whole penal system in our country is a money-making enterprise, right? There are people making millions, billions of dollars off of people who are incarcerated, right? They make it off the bail system and the way we have to pay cash bail to get back to our loved ones. They make it off the phone calls. They make it off the commissary. They make it off of all the charges. They put jails far away from city centers, so they make it off the transportation. Like at every step of the way, money is being made on my mom and Ashley's mom and 2 million other people who are incarcerated. And so she writes me, she can only write little postcards, which are about half the size of this book. And there's no pictures, and there's no beautiful drawings, there's no color. And this was a decision, and I think it was just in this jail, but I'm understanding that it's in more and more. The art's gone, the books are gone, the notion of rehabilitation is largely gone, and it's just it's a holding pattern. And my mother is a woman of extraordinary faith. She's a former nun, a Catholic nun, and so she has this. Prison isn't actually, jail isn't all that different, really, from being a nun in many ways. And so, in many ways, she's quite comfortable and fine and available to the other women, right? She has a lot of money in her commissary. She's having little picnics all the time. They don't feed them lunch on Saturday or Sunday or holidays. It's a county jail. You're not supposed to be there that long, but there she's been, for 16 months, and she's not the only one, right? Because lots of families don't have the money to get their loved ones out of jail, or don't want to, go through all of that again, right? So anyway, I find myself. I found this book not too long ago and found myself just like, oh my gosh, my mom is so present in these, and when we were little, she was so present in the letters, and she's less present in these little, 4x5 postcards that she sends to me and my brother and sister and her grandchildren, But anyway, so I'm lucky that she saved all of these and put them in this book for me pretty soon before my father passed away. But I think about, I guess, and this is just the last thing I'll say, is that, part of this kind of for-profit system means that, like, people lose touch a lot with their family members. These phone calls, which are I think every phone call is a $4 charge, right? Mm-hmm. 15 minutes, and I talk to her once a week, and it's 15 minutes, and, neither of us love the telephone, and so 15 minutes is like, it's enough to kind of have a, we can kind of be in a holding pattern. We can kind of maintain like a relationship that's really deep. We can't process anything real. I can't be mad at her. She can't really interrogate my decisions about things in any sort of way. She has a problem that we have a trampoline. She doesn't really like the trampoline in our backyard. She's really worried about it. Anyway, but I think about, there are a lot of women with no one to call, no one who's going to pick up the phone, a lot of women who aren't getting any postcards, to the point where she just passes our postcards around, and we stand in for so many like kind of absent loved ones, and that's kind of lovely, and incredibly heartbreaking at the same time, because I'm conscious of that being super public when I write these postcards to her, so we keep it really superficial, I guess.
Frieda, I just want to say thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And last semester, I had the opportunity and the privilege to teach at a prison in Enfield, Connecticut. And Ashley Shaw came into my class as a guest speaker. And, you know, in my class, you mentioned to some of the individuals who are incarcerated, who have been incarcerated for over 20 plus years, in that room, you know, how it felt to be in that room. If you could shed a little bit of light on that as well, I would greatly appreciate that, because you said that was your first experience of actually walking into a prison.
That was a crazy day. Before I speak on that, I want to say that I was laughing and smiling the whole time you were talking, because I resonate with everything that you said. And I'm fighting back tears and laughter. It's weird. I actually just got a letter from my mom 2 days ago that was artwork, and she's a phenomenal artist, so I really related to that from the book too. And yeah, growing up, she was always in jail. She was always in prison. One of my earliest memories was riding with my grandmother to Niantic to visit my mom in the orange jumpsuit. And so it's always been a part of my life. So I had the same mentality, like, okay, I'm in my 20s. Shouldn't I be over it by now? Isn't it something that just, it is the way that it is? I should just be used to it at this point. Luckily, I work a 12-step program that's helped me work on that internal battle, and today, truthfully, I feel fine about everything that's happened. I've done a lot of work on it. I've forgiven. I am okay. I have a good relationship with my mom now, but it was non-existent, so it doesn't feel a whole lot different right now with her incarcerated for 7.5 years. It doesn't feel very different. The hardest part about that was I have a younger brother. She's incarcerated in Arizona, so my younger brother is also across the country, and that kind of severed ties with me having a strong relationship with him. So there's other aspects that make it hard, not so much just her being separated from me, because that's been always. It's always been that way. The day we went to the prison, I actually wrote an introduction for my college course I started yesterday, and they asked for a fun fact, and I said I do a lot of public speaking, and one of my favorites was speaking at a prison in Enfield, and I talked about that day.
An all-men's prison.
An all-men's prison.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The day Booker asked me to go speak there, it happened to be my mom's birthday. And she had already been incarcerated. She's been in since August 1st of last year, and her birthday was March 7th. So he didn't know that when he invited me to go. So we go, and I told the guys that, you know, they were my mom to me that day. It was the first day I got to walk inside of a facility like that, a prison, and see kind of what my mom might be dealing with, what her environment might be like, you know, and it was my first real look into that lifestyle. I can hear all about it, you know, she can write all about it, but actually seeing it that day for me kind of changed my perspective on my mother in another way. And that was huge for me. And I talked a lot about forgiveness that day, and I will stand by that. That is the most important thing I have learned in my life so far. Forgiveness is key. I was so angry at my mom my whole life. Jarrett in this book talks about, you know, he had phases of like, I miss my mom, you know, and he would hold on to anything that she gave him. I think it was a stuffed animal or something, and he held on to it, and he mentioned, you know, when you don't see your mom that often, you hold on to anything that she gives you. It's the only thing you have. And I remember doing that with everything she would give me. And I did that with a newspaper article with her name in it in the police logs in 3rd grade. It was the only thing I had of my mom. I remember carrying that around. So I really resonated with that. But it's hard. But I luckily have a great support system, and I do a lot of internal work on it, so it's getting better. But yeah.
Thank you. And, you know, when I think about, you know, a lot of stuff is internal, right? And we take it all in, and that trauma that we deal with, right? And sometimes people think it just leaves us. So, you know, Sammy, you mentioned earlier, and Tirico, you mentioned earlier as well, you know, dealing with person with abuse, drug addiction as well, right? Many of you have mentioned that as well on the panel. You know, what was it like to deal with a family member who was addicted to drugs? You know, and, you know, how did that, you know, what did you learn from that experience? Because I know when I was thinking of this question in my own head, I started thinking of when I was a little boy just sitting in the room, crawling on the floor, peeking through the doorway, because I knew I heard screaming and yelling and banging on the door, and I knew the police was coming in. So I had to stay really quiet and pretend I was like sleeping. But I knew what was going on, and I knew about drugs and stuff being in the 3rd grade and cocaine vials and all that. So I remember learning about drugs so young to the point, and then I would walk out my neighborhood, walk outside, and I would see drugs there too as well. So I remember taking all that in and processing that as a little boy and saying to myself, I don't want to be like that. So I remember as I got to a teenager, I was like, that's not cool to smoke. It's not cool to drink. Because I remember identifying those drugs as not cool. That looks really like sloppy. That's not cool. I don't want that smell on my clothes. Because I know what that smells like. I've smelled that all my life. So I'm not doing that stuff. So for my panel, for some of you who have dealt with that, you know, what was it like for you to deal with a family member who was addicted to drugs, or maybe still is? And how, like, what did you learn from that lesson? Sammy?
Yeah, so my mother, when she regained custody of me, she was clean. Fun fact is that the only drug that I knew of that she would smoke is marijuana. Now, everyone has conflictual perceptions on it. Some people agree with it, some people don't. But she hid that away from me to a point that I didn't find that out until later. And because she was really strategic with not allowing me to be exposed to that. You know, I would knock on the door and she'd be like, don't come in here. But I say that because she was really clear. She saw how drugs affected her, and she didn't want me to get exposed to that. So that's how I can kind of relate to that. But my uncle, he was a heavy drinker before he got incarcerated, and he used various different drugs. And I didn't really know so much about it, but I knew that he was really addicted to drinking, to a point where he would just play pranks on people, but he would get violently angry with his daughter and some of his sons, and he would say things to try to justify, oh, they didn't clean the dishes here, or they didn't do this, they didn't clean their room, or they just think I'm a fool. Or he would be highly paranoid about someone owing him money. You know, so being a young person, 17, 18 years old, because, you know, at that time my uncle stepped into my life as a major role model after my mother passed. And I kind of agreed with a lot of those things. Like, yeah, I mean, you should be upset. You know, they didn't clean the dishes, but he would take it really, really far and pretty extreme. And, you know, he was incarcerated for a lot of years obviously a lot of people know that when you're doing drugs and alcohol, you make really bad, violent decisions. So because because of him deciding to use drugs to make those decisions, he was incarcerated. And coming out, he's not using marijuana, he's not drinking, but what I did notice is that he's leaned on using tobacco, like vaping, and I noticed that he uses it very often. And some people have their opinions about that. The issue that makes it difficult is that now I have a 7-month-old baby. And I did have a discussion about some cursing and even well as, smoking or vaping or whatnot. But he told me he's not going to withhold that. He told me we're not saints over here. And I get it. That's his house. But also, too, I made it clear that because of that decision, me just asking him for a family dinner with a baby, to just not smoke and not to curse, he's not ready to make that decision to stop. And because of that, I won't go over to the house. So it makes it difficult, and then a part of me, it's like it's just a small decision. Why can't you just not do it for 2 hours? And I don't understand, and maybe it's unfair for me to expect. I didn't think it was that much, but maybe it's unfair for me to expect something that he may consider too big of a request. The response he gave me is, "Hey, I'm not using hardcore drugs. I'm not drinking. I'm not smoking cocaine and things of that nature." And so his fallback is, I'll continue to vape because, it's not illegal. I'm not gonna go to jail for it, and I can sense that he still has some type of addiction. And I get it. It's the lesser of two evils. Rather him be addicted to vaping or whatnot, than for him to be addicted to crack and a lot of different drugs.
Substitute something
Yeah.
for something else.
But it's still
Guilty.
tough. It's
Right.
still tough because I was looking forward to bringing my baby over there because there's certain decisions,
Right.
that won't necessarily happen.
Thank you, Sammy.
Can I add to
Absolutely, please. I was
Okay.
going to get ready and ask you about that.
watching alcoholism and drug abuse or even abuse happen at a young age or through your whole life? I feel it can go one of two ways. Your way, which was, I'm never doing that. That's terrible. I'm not touching that. Or my way, I started that way up until I was probably like 14, where I was like, even with friends in school, like, oh, you smoke marijuana? No, get away from me. Or any of that kind of, oh, cute.
Yep.
Any stuff of that nature, I was against it. And then it came to a point where I fell into it. And now here I am doing it. And it can go one of two ways. My cousin, or my uncle, I call him my cousin, my mom's brother, he's my age. His mom, my grandmother, is an alcoholic. So he watched the alcoholism firsthand all the time. He witnessed the drug abuse with my mom firsthand all the time. We both did. He, from 16 years old, knew he wanted to be a cop, wanted to be a firefighter. Now he's an entrepreneur, super successful, barely ever drinks, never touched a drug. We grew up in the same exact environment. I went on to use Percocet 30s and then heroin and crack and alcohol, knowing exactly what could happen. So my point to that, and same with abuse, is I think it's not only just that you're surrounded by it. That plays a role in it, absolutely. But your environment and mental health, I think, are the absolute key ingredients to that. Because if Tommy's group of friends, they were all, video game, skateboard, let's have fun and be goofy boys, right? My friends were, let's smoke some weed on the weekend and have a couple of drinks. And it's not their fault by any means, but I just fell into that kind of lifestyle because that was my environment. That's what I kept myself around. And my mental health was not okay. I was very anxious, I was depressed, and the drugs and the alcohol helped me with that. So yes, seeing it happen maybe it played a role, because I remember when I was active in my addiction, I said, well, this is, what my family does. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is my destiny. I will die like this. I legit said that when I was addicted to heroin. And that is insane to me. But now, being out of that, that's not my family's, way. My grandmother hopefully will be in recovery from alcoholism. My mother will hopefully come out of prison and remain clean after she serves her time. That is my hope. That is what I believe will happen. I'm going to put that out into the universe. That's what's going to happen. I don't think that your family and what you're around absolutely is who you will become, because you have the power to change that, So
That's well said. Thank you, Ashley. Tirico?
Kevin, if I can chime in.
Yes, please.
When they were all talking, I initially started to think about this and processing all the things that were related to the environment of abuse that I grew up in. And I started to think about that although my father was not addicted to drugs, he was addicted to the environment of drugs. Chaos. And the chaos. And so, when we talk about addictions, it's easy to talk about a drug addiction, right? Because there's a physical thing that we know these people are doing. I remember being a kid and having those moments where I wished it was something physical that my father struggled with so I could justify the behaviors that I saw on a daily basis. Because at least then I could say, okay, it's because of this. Which sent me, you talk about a mental tailspin of, wait a minute, he's not even doing drugs. And he's doing these things to me or to my mother. Like, he's in his right state of mind, supposedly, right? But I started to learn quickly that, these addictions and this, the book I'm writing right now, The Venom, that this venom was something that was lying dormant in his life. And I remember when I got to a place where I released my father. When I was really young, I released my father. And I said to him, I recognize that I'm expecting you to be something that you don't have the capacity to be. And that's put a lot of pressure on me mentally in my life. However, I don't think it's fair to you. I really don't think it's fair to you for me to expect you to be something that you're incapable of being. So I don't want you to think that I'm hating you for who you're not to me. I'm just going to believe that God would bring men in my life that would help give me a picture and a representation of what a healthy man is and who it is that I want to become. And I bring that up because, talking about this book, Hey Kiddo, I remember going through the phases. Ashley, you just said that, the phases. I was where you were, Kevin, where I didn't want anything to do. I remember saying, I'm going to be in a committed relationship all my life because my father was not. I literally started to build my goals based on being the man my father was not. But as I matured, Frieda, talking about what you talked about, the heart needing to heal, what I recognized was that my heart hadn't healed yet because my goals that I was setting for my life was spent running from my trauma, but not running to be who I wanted to be as a man, healthy. I literally set my goals and my mentality based on this broken environment. And so at some point I had to recognize, until I was willing to heal, to accept that this was my story, this is who he was, but I could write my own story. I had a right not to run from him. I could decide this is who I want to be, not based on who he was, based on this is who I desire to be. So it's really, I thank you guys so much for sharing your perspectives and your experiences, because the more we talk about it, it kind of opens up a whole lot more for me. in my experience with my parents and being in that environment where there was drugs and where there was abuse. And, you know, same thing, my brother who grew up, he's a half-brother. My brother today, unfortunately, I hate to say it, he's a drug dealer. And so his was totally different. His scenario was totally different. He ended up falling into the abusive behavior, but with drugs. And so unfortunately, I'm blessed to say that, you know, that forgiveness piece for me, you mentioned that earlier, that forgiveness piece was so huge, because I still say to my brother that there's some forgiveness that has to happen. You're still running from dad, but you're running to him. You're running from him and you're running to him. And so it's really learning how to purge yourself so that you can have a healthy environment and have the health and live the life that you want to live, so you're not spending your time running away from trauma.
I like that. Can I say it real quick?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
That reminds me of Tony Robbins. You know who that is?
Yes.
The motivational speaker. I watched his video on Netflix, and he talked to a girl whose father, I believe, was an alcoholic. And he said, okay, well, what do you blame him for? Like, she was mad at him for being an alcoholic and not being there, and she blamed him for feeling abandoned and all this stuff. And then he said, and he uses it with a lot of F-bombs, but he says, if you're going to blame them for the bad they did, you have to blame them for the good that's happening in your life too. And that's kind of what you were talking about. So if I can blame my mom for not being there, I can blame her for the strength I have now
That's
to
right.
get through and persevere, you know? So just like you were saying, but doing it in a healthy way.
In a healthy way.
Exactly. I like that.
So when you talk about running from trauma, and I think about Jarrett's book,
That's right.
and I think about Hey Kiddo. So what do you think, for some of you on the panel who have actually read the entire book, what do you think Jarrett, really, the lesson is behind this book? What do you think the most important lesson is, the important lesson that you have learned from this book? Ashley?
One that I've taken away from this book, I don't know him personally, so I don't know, but one I've taken away from this book is to love no matter what. At the end of the book, the mom said, the only reason I'm still alive is because of Grandpa's love and you, talking about her son. And that reminds me of my grandmother and my mom's relationship is absolutely terrible. That is probably the hardest part of the situation right now. It is horrific. And my mother does not feel that love from her, but she feels the love from her grandfather, my great-grandfather. And she says all the time that that is what helps her get through, you know? And I've learned now, since I've learned how to forgive and work through it, to be supportive and to be there for her, even though she was not there for me. So he learned how to forgive his mom. And by the end of the book, while he's writing this book, she passed away. And I think that if he hadn't learned to accept her and forgive her, he would have had a lot of a harder time dealing with her passing. So that is the lesson I took from this, one of them, because that I want nothing more than to be able to say that I did everything I could do for anyone in my life. And that is to love them, support them, and accept them no matter what. Not condone, not enable, that's very different, but be there for them no matter what, leave the door open. That is what the end of this book showed me, you know?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else would like to share? Important lesson you have learned from the book?
You know, talking about sort of the theme of this panel, the apple not falling far from the tree, or does the apple sort of run as fast as it can from the tree, or, you know, the relationship between the apple and the tree. I was struck that, you know, Jarrett is a father now, and that he didn't have a lot of, you know, great role models to be a father, but that he found, you know, people found him, he found people, he cultivated the relationship with his art teacher. There were other men in his life. He, you know, kind of navigated this tricky relationship with his biological father, and, you know, mostly, I guess, related to that man through his half-siblings, but took his grandfather's good and bad and, somehow kind of pieced together, pulling from all of these different places, maybe more like a bumblebee, getting pollen from different places and creating the honey, the sweet nectar. This metaphor might just jump the rail, but this sweet nectar of fatherhood. And I think this is a very mature book, right? It's the book of a complete adult. And I don't know, he looks actually pretty young, but
He's 24, 25.
is he really?
No, he's 40.
He's 40?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh,
phew. I was like,
jeez.
well,
Yeah.
okay.
Where
But
did I get that?
this is a mature work of a mature man, who wants to be a good father, who wants to unlearn a bunch of lessons, and has a lot to teach. And one of the things I think about a lot is I resonated a lot with what Ashley said about when we sort of blame a family member, for the bad, we also have to sort of, kind of know that we got good from them too. And I think about, sometimes I think my kids have it too easy, and their life isn't as hard as mine was, and I worry that they're not going to be as awesome as I am because their lives weren't hard like mine. This is what keeps me up at night. It's so sad. But I think about sort of like what I think about, what I identify as really good about myself definitely comes from like having to grow up really fast and be confronted with like a lot of the pain of the world at a young age, not being shielded or bubbled, despite having the privilege of whiteness and the privilege of relative lack of poverty. We weren't wealthy, but we were, and so kind of being exposed to a lot at a young age and thinking about, and Patrick and I talk about this a lot, like how to, without throwing our kids in at the deep end of the pool, how to sort of talk to them about racism, how to talk to them about abuses of power.
Does racism and abuse of power?
Wake up, Kevin. Wake up, man. Yeah, please allow me to school you.
We're in a
on these
colorblind
things.
society,
Yeah, right. But to talk to my white children about whiteness and privilege, all of these things, and so I whatever. I don't know exactly where I'm going with all of this, except to say that that there's a maturity in this, and I have a lot of confidence that Jarrett is like a really great father, and is incredibly honest with his children, and will give the kids the tools that they're going to need to navigate this beautiful, awful, just bonkers world that we're all living in 2019 and moving into the future, and I think. So we don't control where the apple falls. We don't control anything except our own actions, right? And our interactions, with other people, and that notion of being sort of an open door, but not a doormat, is powerful. And now I've talked about bees and doormats, and I should just stop talking.
Frieda, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And as we get ready to close out for this, in this panel discussion that we're having, if each one of you can share, what would you like people to learn from your journey? What would you like them to take away from your journey, from your experience? Because as you have some of the listeners there and some of the people who are watching this show, they're probably sitting there right now saying, I just can't forgive my family member for what they did to me. It's just too much pain that I'm going through. Hey, kiddo, I get it. Jarrett's a good dad, and I get that he's dealt with his issues, but I'm still dealing with, as Tirico would say, the venom or the toxic, that toxic negative energy. It's still too much for me to come to terms with what's really going on presently in my life. So what advice would you have for them, especially making that connection to your own journey? and what you are dealing with at this point.
Kevin, I would say to that individual that, one, it's okay to be where you are. It's very, very okay for you to be where you are, and that one of the greatest things about our lives is we get to live in the present, which I call a gift. And in that present, you get to unwrap, unfold, review, relook at things. And I want to challenge that person to where they are now to be willing to look again. And when I say look again, not at the trauma, but look at themselves in the mirror. And I had to make discoveries about my desires and what it was that I desired. The pain doesn't go away or disappear from my past, but my future is waiting on the decisions that I make today. And so because my future is waiting on those decisions, it was important and imperative enough for me to forgive, not for them, but for me. It was important for me to forgive for my family that I knew would come. It was important for me to forgive for my children who would grow up someday and, as they do today, say, so dad, who's your dad? And I have to have a conversation about who my dad is. And they deserve the opportunity to have a healthy view. If it's nothing else that we can give our kids health. And so forgiveness for me was also about knowing that I'm protecting something that I knew I couldn't stop for me, I can help them with. And so that is an investment that I'm willing to make for my family. So I would ask that individual to look at their family, look at themselves, and determine what they want for their future, what they want for their family, and to begin building it on forgiveness.
Thank you.
Thank you. Forgiveness is the most important thing, but if you're not ready to forgive, for one, there's always hope, I feel. And if you can do anything with it, I would say do something positive with it. If there's anything that you can do, I'm trying to think of a good example. One of the negative things that happened in my life, of course, was falling into drug addiction. I turned around, I came into recovery, and now I work in the community with a nonprofit to try and raise awareness so other people don't go through that. I turned that negative into a positive, trying to turn it around. But first and foremost, I want to say that there is absolutely always hope. Whether you're struggling, someone else is struggling, there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you.
When I think of forgiveness, I think of a lot about some of the things that I went through, but what really forgiveness really means. Usually when someone is resistant on forgiving another person, it's like a matter of power. Like I have the power to say that what you did, like I'm past it, or it's like it's okay, or and that's not what that's about. When you forgive someone, you're not necessarily saying that it's okay. You made a mistake. It's all right. You can still forgive someone and still understand that they don't have to rebuttal with anything. They don't have to say, I was right. I shouldn't have been using drugs. And to know that you can expect something out of the forgiveness, but also you can't feel as if you hold that power. And I think when someone feels hurt, they feel like they've been cheated. So they use that as like, I have the power now to forgive you or not. And really, we don't have the power. God has the power. So what makes us so selfish enough to try to attain the power that God has. And that's what is about. And I talk about that because when my mother passed, I prayed, and I wasn't a God-fearing person at that time. I prayed because I was desperate. I wanted her to stay, and she was in a coma. And because she didn't stay, right? God, with his own wisdom, said she can't stay here no longer. I was mad at him. And I chose to take it out on him. Like, no, there's no right. And for the longest, I chose not to forgive him because I felt like he doesn't deserve it. And this moment right here is something that I think most people can relate to. It's that we don't have that power. It's out of our hands. And we can't know all those answers. But we do have the power to try to understand that person, right? And that comes with asking questions or just reconnecting, or just letting them know, hey, I forgive you, and then letting it be it. That's it. You don't have to reconnect or anything. As long as you understand that when the time comes, you've forgiven that person, and that is all. And then, so I think that's an important thing to really analyze yourself when it comes to forgiveness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Frieda?
Yeah, something in your question, Kevin, and the person you're sort of bringing into our midst made me really think about loneliness and how alone so many people feel, and how easy it is when you're feeling scared, when you're feeling traumatized, when you're feeling triggered, to kind of turtle your way in, and to fail to recognize that we all are carrying so much on our backs. We could all have a beautiful story of our lives be written, right, with a lovely graphic artist kind of telling the story of our lives, and that there would be more that was the same in each of our stories than is different, despite our differences of race and class and the countries we come from, or everything that distinguishes us and makes us individuals, also really ties us together. And I would encourage that person to reach out, right, and to kind of reach across, and to kind of be, no more strangers, right? No more separation. That we're all neighbors, and that we're all broken, and that we're all carrying a weight. And it would kind of be powerful to see everybody's weight, to see the burden that every person carries, because so much in our culture tells us that everybody else is doing just fine, and it's just you. It's just you. You just, and that's why you got to take the drug. That's why you got to drink the alcohol. That's why you got to kind of, anesthetize, is that the word? Desensitize yourself with this or that, because everybody else is doing just great. And you're the only one who feels the way you do. And so we get these messages, and we got to just say, nope, like, everybody's feeling that same brokenheartedness, and it's okay. It's okay, and I'll listen to you. I'll listen to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for sharing that. And I just, as in closing, I think about going back to that 7th grader when I was 12 years old. And I remember one day, it was my first parent-teacher conference when I was in the 7th grade. And my mother, she's carrying 30 bags of groceries because she had to take a bus ride for like 10 miles to go to the grocery store. Because where I was from, it's like a food desert in my city. They didn't really have too many grocery stores. So she had to take the bus because we didn't have a car for years. And I remember like getting on the bus, we would go up the street and help my mother with these bags of groceries and bring them back to the house. And then around 5 o'clock, 5:30 around there, she was like, okay, I want to go to the parent-teacher conference. And my father comes home after just taking a hit, And he says, I want to go too. And I remember my mom, we'd been on the city bus, and my mother's like, I know you're going to embarrass your son. You know, you're going to embarrass your son, like, showing up like this at the parent-teacher conference. You're really going to embarrass your son. And my dad says, he says, you know, I know I messed up, but I love my son. And my brother was there, who's 3 years younger than I am, and he says, I love my son, I know I messed up right now. And I know I look a mess, but I always want to be there to show that I love my son no matter what. I got my own demons I'm dealing with. And he said, I got to work through all this in my own life, because it's stuff I've been carrying since I was a child. I remember being 12 years old, taking that in on that city bus, sitting in the back of that city bus at 12, taking that in as a 12-year-old. And I learned from that we cannot control our own actions. And I remember sitting back as a 12-year-old, processing that and saying, geez, I can't control my dad, but I can control my own actions and how I process something. So when I got 16 years old, my brother was 13 years old, we made a promise to ourselves to never drink, never to smoke, to make sure we change the legacy of our family. That in this generation, this is what we do now. So, because we can control our own actions. So at 16, we made a promise, and we stuck to that. And that's something that I never smoked to this day, never drank anything in my life. And I remember walking, and when I would go into like a bar or something, you know, if I was like, when I was younger and I wanted to impress like a girl, I'd say, give me a Sprite and put a little orange in there or something. Make me look cool. But I was just drinking a Sprite. And I remember like thinking to myself, because that's not something I do. That's not the way I grew up. I don't want that in my life. And thinking of that, I started thinking about how everything in life happens for a reason. So I don't ever regret anything in my life happening. I go, thank God it did happen. Because now, as an individual now, I can help other people who are dealing with addiction. I can talk to other people who have alcoholism, alcohol problems and stuff, and not look down on them and say, you know what, I understand where you're coming from here. Because this is what I dealt with all my life. So it's not, that to me encouraged me to be a stronger leader. So I embrace all those obstacles that I went through in my life, and I understand the importance of it. But when you guys talk about forgiveness, I think as adults we have to model forgiveness. Right. And the person I learned from the most about forgiveness was my mom. Watching her go through certain obstacles in her life, and to be able to sit down at the table with people who have hurt her and really genuinely forgive them. Not say she forgive them, but genuinely show it and express it, have them in a car, sit down with them, have them at the dinner table, and really demonstrate forgiveness from her heart, and give them a hug and say, I forgive you and I love you. That, to me, allowed me to understand forgiveness and to be able to express it and to be able to understand that nothing has to stay the same forever. So people have to walk on their journey on their own and be at their own point, but you have to continue to move in your own court so that you can be a model and a positive example for others. So I want to thank you again. I love all of you, and I love all your positive energy, and I've worked with you all on many levels. And I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here tonight. And I genuinely mean that with all my heart. Thank you. And thank you for the listeners. Have a wonderful day.